Hello, Rob here from the Flanagan Homestead. Just down the hill here, about a quarter mile, is where my campground is, and I've just finished my Hobbit house and recently listed it on hipcamp.com, and it's been booked almost every night, and people are saying they really love the look of it and the character and how it looks like a real Hobbit house. Anyway, in the next 17 minutes, I'm going to show you start to finish how we turned this hillside into this Hobbit house. Hope you enjoy. We'll get to the build in a second, but before you can start building, you have to clear the site. You can see the maple tree on the right. I chose the site partly because there's level ground and then that maple tree, which will make a nice setting for a yard in front of the Hobbit house, and then the hillside here. These trees that I'm knocking down had to go. A couple of them were dead anyway, but then they were in the home site. So I brought the excavator out and tried knocking them down instead of cutting them down. I was hoping to knock them down with the excavator because then the leverage of the tree helps loosen the roots as it falls down. But this was late in the summer when we started doing this, and the ground was very dry, and this clay, it gets really hard when it's dry, so the root ball didn't just tip out on too many of them. You could see that it did actually come out with this tree. Digging was slow because of how hard the ground was, and this particular tree had a super hard root ball to get out. It was tough, and it was tied together with the other roots of some of the other trees, and it did not want to give up. Once the site was excavated, it was time to pour the foundation. You can't tell from this video, but the road is curvy and narrow, and there's no way to get a truck up. So we had to bring a mixer up, pulled it up with the excavator, and we hauled gravel in the back of this Polaris Ranger, multiple loads for the aggregate to mix the concrete. I'm guessing we were able to haul maybe a quarter of a yard at a time in the back of the Polaris, maybe not that much, but yeah, you can see here that this is a difficult road that would have been hard to get. Certainly couldn't have got a cement truck up. To this day, this hard right turn when it turns up the hill is causing problems with people trying to get up to the site. Once we got up top, we started mixing. There's several young gentlemen here. My son's in the Navy, who was on leave and had some friends from the Navy come, and they wanted to see what was going on, so they helped mix. I'm pounding in rebar stakes for the cinder block is going to sit around. The 2x4 laying there has marks on the distances that I want as we've started to pour. We poured the footing and the slab all in one pour. Around the edges it is definitely deeper than the rest of the slab. As we finished the mixing, I had the boys clean up the equipment and head on home. Jacob stayed and helped me screed it out, and then I got on knee boards and troweled out the surface. After that, I made a trip to Home Depot. Actually, I made several trips to pick up cinder block, but I only wanted to carry so much at a time in my pickup, and I did drive it all the way up the hill, and so I needed to not have too much. Plus, I grabbed it with the excavator and took the pallet and set it right in the middle of the structure so that the bricks were right there ready to use. Next, I had to set up my boards and make sure they were perfectly plumb and in the exact spot so that I could run my mason line through it. The mason line then will be used to make sure that my wall is perfectly straight as I put the edges of the block against it. Also, on each row height, the line is there to make sure that I am keeping the right height all the way across the wall. Now, I have laid cinder block walls before, but it's been a while, and getting the touch and feel of mixing the mortar and setting the bricks took me a while to get going. But about the time I finished the structure, I was moving smoothly again. I put rebar on every horizontal row and every other vertical row so that when I filled it with concrete, the wall would be nice and strong, and when the earth was pushed back against it, it would hold strong. Fortunately, when it was time to put concrete inside the cinder block walls, Jacob was still here to help me mix. That saved my back. I have a little device here I made to guide the concrete in so I can just grab the mud and throw it at the wall, and it funnels it in, fills up the bricks. Once the wall cured a little bit, we started the waterproofing process. This is really important here in the Pacific Northwest, where it's going to rain 9 months and the water is going to come down off the sides of the roof and right against the wall. This is an expensive product, but it's a tar-like material that you first spread a layer on the wall. And while it is still wet, there's something that's very similar to a landscape fabric that you press into it and then press it down tightly against it and have it so some of the tar is oozing through, some of it is not, and you let this first layer dry a day, and then after it dries one day, you come back and you put a layer on the outside. Then of course you need drain rock. I threw the pipe in, and once again I'm loading up down below, and I'm putting the rock in a bucket, taking up in the Ranger, and then dropping it over the wall to cover my drain pipe so that the water will run down into the drain pipe. The technique of filling up 5-gallon buckets at the bottom of the hill and bringing the buckets up full in the Ranger worked really well, because once I got to the top, the buckets were already full and I just had to dump them over the wall. Once the rock was in, covered it with landscape fabric. At this point, fall was coming, it was getting wet, so we backfilled to the top of the walls and let it set in. The next step during the winter is I was building my trusses. A lot of people were interested to see how I did this, and unfortunately I lost all my video, or most of my video, on how I did this. I used a piece of wood as an oversized compass to scribe both the inside and outside lines of my trusses. I made sure the first one was cut absolutely perfectly. After cutting it out, I used it to scribe the lines on 40 different pieces of plywood. I could get 4 different arches out of one piece of plywood. After cutting the template and building the jig, I moved everything down to the shop for the winter, and I was going to try to build these in the evenings throughout the winter, and so I would have them done for the next summer. I would cut plywood and alternate where the seams were. It would take at least 3 pieces, sometimes 4 pieces of plywood to make one arch, and then I put glue between each layer, and then I screwed it together from both sides. So each truss had 4 layers of plywood thick. It had glue in between each joint and at least 100 screws in each one. Here I'm making sure that everything matches up perfectly because they were built individually. I'm planing them down so that when they go up on the wall, it'll have a smooth surface. Fast forward a few months when the weather's getting nice and it's time to put the trusses up. I had to drill holes in a pressure-treated sill plate to put it on the brick wall and bolt them down. And then I had my oldest and youngest, you see here. Isaiah's lifting the truss with me right now, and Troy's holding the one behind me. And they're helping put the truss in. This is obviously more than a one-man job. I did most of this by myself, but it was nice to have the boys here to help me out on this one. This was a fun day to see everything taking shape. We were really happy with how the trusses fit the plan. Not that it shouldn't have, but all the measurements worked and the trusses fit perfectly in place. And so we set them all up. Here's our time lapse as we're putting all the trusses up, making sure that they're vertical. And then we have 2x6 material going over the top to create the roof that's strong enough to put dirt over the top of it. The back wall was built with 2 layers of 2x material. The vertical ones are alternating 2x4 and 2x6 because that's the look that you're going to see inside the Hobbit house. Then I used 2x12s and 2x8s on the outer wall and nailed those on for extra strength. A pond liner was placed over the top for waterproofing. This was one of the more expensive parts of the project. Because there was going to be literally tons of dirt pushing on the back side of the Hobbit house and nothing on the front side holding against it, I had to put an anchor in the ground. Hundreds and hundreds of pounds of concrete are actually in this hole, and then I anchored in a chain, and then I have eye bolts on the side of the house, and then a turnbuckle to tighten this so that as the pressure of the earth pushes against the back wall, it will not push forward. At that point in time, we started filling in the dirt from the backside. I started doing it slowly at first, not wanting it to create too much pressure at once. As we continued to fill the earth in, again, there's tons of earth that actually on top of this. The arch structure gives it a lot of strength, and we just continue to add earth to it, being careful not to put too much pressure with the excavator at any one time. I tried to get some of the dirt on both sides packed in a little bit, before I put too much on the backside. So this would help alleviate the pressure or the tendency to push forward as I filled in earth on the backside. As we pushed towards the front, there was no way to keep all the earth from pushing forward too far and having a slope. I needed more of a vertical wall of dirt. So I created a retaining wall by cutting out a flat spot. And then I had this cottonwood tree that had been cut down to make an RV site that I have safe. And I decided to use the log, bring big chunks of it up to the Hobbit house, and I cut off 3-foot lengths at a time. And I used the nice pig rails in the bottom and stacked this up against the Hobbit house and against the earth wall. This made a nice retaining wall that held back the earth, and I could then fill the earth in around more towards the front of the Hobbit house. It took a good deal of effort, but I did like how the round logs adds to the round look of the Hobbit house, plus the wood gives a natural look of the retaining wall. Before pushing the dirt back on top of the logs, I did cover the logs with plastic to keep it a little bit drier so that prevent them from rotting out too fast. And then we continued to push the dirt forward. Then on to making the signature piece of the Hobbit house, the round front door. I took rough sawn lumber that I had on my property and I glued them and screwed them together perpendicularly in a fairly big square. And once again, I created a compass or a way to scribe out the lines. I made sure that all the boards fit outside the line. And once again, besides the glue, I did lots and lots of screws holding it together. Once the glue was dried, the lines were scribed again. Actually, there was 2 lines. The line that I'm doing right here is the outside of the trim. There's about a 4-inch trim around the Hobbit house door. I had to cut around this twice to make the door and the trim. Traditionally, according to the books and the movies, the Hobbit house door is green. I didn't want to do the whole door in green, so I cut this trim and painted the trim green to put it up. You'll see that later. To hinge this heavy of a door, I didn't think I could leave it perfectly round. So I cut a line where I had intentionally put a post on the framing to hold the door up. And then this gave me about a 4-foot straight line that I could put hinges on, and it would swing there. The door still looks perfectly round from the outside, and most of the round swings, except for that small section you see on the right, that stays fastened to the wall. To get this door secured in the right spot, once again I had to bring in more muscle. This time my wife came and helped me out. Just a slight, very slight twist. The stud is securing into the stud. Cutting a straight line to go against the ground on my door trim. Next, it was to put up the river rock wall. This is something I had never done before. This turned out to be a fun project. It took me a little while to get the right moisture content in the mortar and figure out how thick to put it on and how moist or runny or not runny to have it. But then once I started figuring out, it was get the mortar on, press it against the wall, tap it in a few times to make sure that it squished in there tight and it held on. And then we mortared between each of the rocks with the mortar bag. To smooth this out, I let it dry for a little bit and then used a wet sponge to just smooth this out and give it a nice look. I attached my router to an arm to pivot again so I could cut nice round circles and a nice inset to put my round windows in. I had some rough moments, but it worked out nicely. I have a lot of horizontal framing so that my board and bat siding goes on more easily. As I worked away across, it was hard to get the perfectly cut angle to match the trim board. So you can see I'm taking clamps off of strips of wood that I cut thin and bent and glued on there to help trim that out. And then finishing putting the bats over the boards. At this point, the basic structure is done. And then it was time to move on to building a decorative fence. I picked up some cedar from a friend that has a sawmill, and he cut it in 1-inch thick slabs. It had a lot of knots, which gave it a lot of character, a lot of ups and downs. I did cut some of the wider pieces in half, and then because I wanted to keep the look, I did draw some lines and take a wood carving tool for my angle grinder, and I just started grinding out angles on the other side to make it have the natural look on the opposite side. I wanted to make the fence portable for a number of reasons. One, so I could move it for mowing, and two, I can move it to different places to stage for pictures or whatnot. So I drilled a hole in the bottom and pounded a Christmas tree stands in the bottom of it, which allowed for it to be nice and sturdy standing upright, but still easily movable. After creating my uprights, I set them on cinder blocks to hold it at the right level, make sure it was where I wanted it, and put some exterior screws into the boards and made a nice looking cedar rail fence. You can see they're pretty easy to move, and I can move them back and forth. Their final setting place is actually farther from the Hobbit house than you see here. Unfortunately, at this point, I was in a rush to get this done so I could list it for the summer. And so a lot of the finished details that I would have liked to have shown you, like the staining and the wood conduit to hide the electrical and the other details I did, I wasn't able to record because it just took too much time and I needed to get done. You can see the flagstone path there in front. We got a little decorations, rocking chair there. You go inside, I actually paid for a very nice bed that has an adjustable frame so the people can stay on it. I have a map of the Middle Earth, a couple rocking chairs in the round table, and we have the ring from Lord of the Rings there. Also a fake fireplace that does put out the heat, some old school lights that look like lamps, and we did put a microwave in there just in case people staying needed to heat something up. Once you come outside, you have the fire pit. You again see the flagstone. There's a nice view outside of it, and I did put a sink right next to the Hobbit house. And finally, a sign to show guests the way. Thanks for watching, and please consider leaving a like and comments.